Another rant. You Americans, Americans are many things. We are not just one demographic, one type of people. We are many different types of people, and each of us are many different things. I'm an atheist, humanist. I have Jewish descent. I'm also a veteran, and I take care of sons with disabilities. We are many things. These stickers you have with, things about the Confederacy. FYI, just a side note, the Confederacy lost. And what the Confederacy represented was slavery. They were pro-slavery. They tried to divide America, and they were anti-freedoms. The Confederacy lost. So if you are pro-Confederacy, you are not a true American, and you are not representative of all of America, because once again, America is many things. So to get back to my original point, those of us who are pro Black Lives Matter, who are for the BLM movement, that doesn't make us, all of us, anti-police or anti-law enforcement or anti-government. I am not anti any of those things. In fact, my bachelor's degree I got was sociology with a criminology emphasis. It is not in me to work in law enforcement per se. It takes a very special person to work in law enforcement. I am but I'm also fighting for people with mental illness. All right, my internet went out. So I'm not sure what was recorded last. The Black Lives Matter movement doesn't just benefit people of color. Everything in that effort will also benefit people with disabilities, will benefit people who in older age groups, older demographics. And you have to understand, people with mental illness and or different kinds of intellectual disabilities make up almost half of all police killings. And that's largely because we have put so much on police because we have no one else to turn to for a lot of things. So this idea that we're defunding the police, well, we're not really doing that. That's a really, really bad slogan. It gets attention, however. It truly is an eye-opener. It wakes people up. But what we're doing is we're reforming our system, and law enforcement is just one part of public safety. Another part of public safety is fire department. Another part of public safety needs to be our social workers, our mental health workers, and a lot of police departments, I'm proud to say, here in our area, the Fountain City Police Department and the City of Colorado Springs, they're trying to work with agencies like Aspen Point to bring in non-armed caseworkers, mental health workers, to respond to non-criminal situations, non-criminal calls for help that don't need someone with who's armed. So these are really, really important distinctions. So you can be for Black lives, for people with disabilities, for mental health, and still be very supportive of our law enforcement. And yes, much of our law enforcement system, they're really, really good people. They are truly. And they go into law enforcement, most of them, the vast majority of them go into law enforcement because they want to serve our communities. And yes, there are some bad apples. Now, separate from that, when we're talking about privilege when we're talking about white privilege, for example, or male privilege. There are things that white people will never ever experience when we have interactions with law enforcement or criminal justice because of our skin color. That's what privilege means. There are situations where, when we're talking about male privilege, there are things that men never experience simply because you're a man. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about privilege. It doesn't mean you don't work hard. It doesn't mean you haven't done your fair share when it comes to working hard in your life and that kind of stuff. That's not what privilege is about. So going back to my original point, America is many things. And if you claim to love America, but truly don't love all Americans, you only want Americans to be one kind of person that fits into your comfort zone, it's going to be a really hard life for you, because America is many, many different things, many different kinds of people. And as a veteran, one of the things that I valued the most was my experience in the military and around the military, serving with people in uniform and military civilians, DOD civilians, government civilians of all different walks of life, all different races from all different countries, and all of us working together and learning about each other from each other. And my life became so rich when I joined the military. Now, that said, the military has a lot of flaws that have to be fixed. The military is still discriminatory when it comes to race. The military still has its discrimination with regard to women and women's needs. We are working on all of those things, and this is what makes America great. America was always great. America is still very flawed, but America is always great. And this is what makes America great, is our ability to work on all of these things and to make improvements all of the time. And even though 2020 saw some terrible, terrible things with the murder of George Floyd at the hands of a system that not only allowed the murderer to be in uniform, but allowed his colleagues to stand by while he murdered George Floyd. The people who killed the young man in Aurora, Elijah McClain. But the system is improving, and the Aurora Police Department now has a chief that she is working hard to make positive changes to improve the department, to weed out those people who would not only murder but not step in when they see a colleague doing something they shouldn't be doing. So that is America. Where I live here in Fountain, we have won the award for being the All-American City. And I believe that that's largely because of the military presence here, because we have this incredible diversity here. Keyword being diversity. We have a military presence which implies a military community that cares about America and American citizens. And that distinction should include and should really emphasize the diversity that is all of America. So if you have an American flag on your car and it has a blue line in it, keep in mind that you may be the white nationalist who thinks that America is only one thing, and behind that blue line, that blue stripe on your flag, is a Confederate pattern. We are not just one thing when it comes to Americans. We are many things. We are all different skin colors and all different belief systems and all different cultures and walks of life and all different upbringings. And Our police departments, our public safety, our law enforcement, they are doing incredible things to improve. And working with them, we will continue improving and making improvements in our society. That is what makes America great. That is what allows America to continue to be flawed and make mistakes, but then look at those mistakes and say, you know what, we are going to make things better. We are making changes. And that includes the BLM movement, and that includes all of the police officers and administration folks and city folks and people who are working hard to look at what's happening in their departments and say, you know what, we have this problem. What do we do to fix it? Okay, this is what we do to fix it. And so I know that, you know, the free speech thing is huge when it comes to, you know, when we put these symbols on our cars. Keep in mind that symbols just are a representation of something. The flag is a representation of freedoms that not yet everyone benefits from. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was denied to George Floyd. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness has also been denied to people in uniform, officers who do go out every day and they never know what they're going to be confronted with. Both of those are worthy of what our symbols represent. They're worthy of what our flag represents. So America is great because we have the ability to keep on improving. America still has many flaws. And saying that America has flaws is part of what makes America great, because in some places, in some countries, criticizing our government, criticizing our community is the very thing that will get you shot and killed or ostracized or whatever it is. Here in America, part of what makes America great is being able to criticize and say, you know what, we see these problems, what can we do to improve these things? It doesn't mean that we're anti-police. Saying that there's something wrong with something in the system doesn't necessarily mean you have to be against the system. That very system has the ability to change and improve, and that's what makes America great, is people putting their heads together and saying, okay, we've got this problem, or maybe it wasn't a problem 20 years ago when, for example, No Child Left Behind Act was implemented. The goals of that act were good. The goals of that act were positive. As we've learned over time, there are outcomes that weren't so great. So part of what makes America great is, and part of the reason America has always been great, is because we see a problem, there's problems identified, there's some flaws, and we have the ability to criticize it and to analyze it and find new solutions. So, for example, the Brady Bill, the act that outlawed assault-like weapons, assault-like firearms, it wasn't perfect. And it was allowed to expire. And there's a lot of criticism around it. Let's have a conversation and figure out what makes sense. And there are a lot of gun owners who do believe in sensible regulation. You guys, we need to be part of the conversation around these things. Okay, so the Brady Act was not perfect. The current, Healthcare Act, what we call Obamacare. Obamacare is not healthcare. It's a law. And it wasn't perfect. And there are flaws. Part of what makes America perfectly great is that we have the ability to identify problems and improve on them to make things better. And so let's have a conversation that includes all of the voices that are what make America great. And if you have a concern, if you have a criticism, you see a problem, you see a flaw, then as a great American, it is your duty to say, okay, yes, we have this problem, but let's talk about it. Let's have a dialogue and try to find a conversation, try to establish a conversation. Now, that said, people have been talking police reform for decades. Those words didn't reform the police. Oftentimes, at least not in any dramatically progressive, making progress timely that we needed. And we realized that when we all watched the murder of George Floyd, when we watched the gunning down of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and these things, now we have people saying, defund the police. We have to define what that logo means, what defunding looks like. It's not defunding, it's reallocation of funds to implement other things that will help with public safety response, like social workers and people who are skilled in responding to calls for help for mental illness and for, help with, and also educating first responders, responding to people with intellectual disabilities. It's so terrible that people with intellectual and other different kinds of disabilities are killed. But it's because sometimes when we call for help, there's no one but the police to call for help. Okay, let's bring in those, let's reallocate some of the funds in our public safety and wherever we can to bring in first responders who maybe like ambulance personnel and, rescue, our rescuers, our rescue response with our fire department. They are not only skilled as EMTs, but with, responding to a fire. Many here in Fountain, many of our fire department responders are actually trained to help respond to emergencies that include animals, cats, dogs, livestock of different kinds, horses, cattle, pigs, and even possibly some of the birds. If we can do that, if we can teach first responders to be skilled to respond to emergencies that include animals, we have the ability to not only teach and train, but also bring on board people who have the ability to respond to calls for help that are non-criminal, but include mental illness and intellectual disabilities of different kinds. That's what we mean when we mean defund the police. Now, granted, there may be some people who are so angry and they absolutely mean defund the police literally in those terms, but it doesn't have to be that. And that is not what the reality of what needs to happen. So the original point, I know the first responders, First Amendment, free speech, you have the right to put a flag on your car that has the blue stripe. You have the right to put Confederate flags on your car. Know that if you're for the Confederacy, that is anti-American, because the Confederacy was not for America. Confederacy was for slavery and for dividing America at that time, and the Confederacy lost. So if you are pro-Confederacy, you are anti-American, and America is not a Confederacy. So if you are anti-people of color, whether or not you are for slavery, I would really seriously have, a serious personal thought process around that, what that means. But being pro-BLM does not mean that we are anti-law enforcement. I personally, as a humanist, my entire purpose in life is trying to build bridges, trying to initiate, implement conversations, to build dialogue, and to try to get people to think. So that was an extra long rant, but I need people to think about the realities of symbols. The Confederate symbol and the Confederate leaders in the statues dedicated to them, those statues belong in museums, not in military installations, not in schools, not in college campuses. So we can learn about them and how they contributed to America's history, and the fact that the Confederacy lost and we remained the United States of America, not the northern states, and the Confederacy being the southern states. So please think about that.